The dog went under the porch at 2:45 and would not come out, and that was the first thing that told Dale Witz something was wrong with the night. He sat on the top step in his sock feet with the screen door propped against his shoulder and listened. The hollow ran quiet below the house, the way it did every night this time of year. The creek low and steady over the flat rocks where Muddy Fork bent around the foot of the ridge. He knew that sound the way. He knew the pop of his own knees in the morning. He had lived at the head of this hollow for 19 years, in the house his wife's grandfather had framed out of chestnut before the blight took every tree of it off the mountain. And in 19 years he had learned what the place sounded like when it was right. It was not right now. The frogs had stopped. Not slowed, not thinned. Stopped, the way a radio stops when a hand turns the dial. All at once and complete, and the silence they left behind had a shape to it that he did not like. Dale was a careful man by trade and by nature. He ran a pump and well service out of a shop he had built himself off the county road, and most of his work was 40 feet down in the dark, where a man could not afford to guess. He set casing, he pulled pumps off failed wells. He read pressure gauges and amp draws, and the color of the water that came up first, the rust in it, the grit, the smell of sulfur that told him things about the rock he stood on that no map would. He had gone down into wells where the air was bad and come back up because he had read the flame on a match going blue before he climbed in. And he had walked off jobs that other men took because the signs were wrong and the signs were right to be afraid of. He had built a small, steady living out of being right about things other men hoped about. He did not exaggerate. He did not tell stories at the diner that grew in the telling. When a customer asked him how bad a well was, he gave them a number, and the number was true, and that was why they called him back, and called their neighbors to call him too. So when he tells you the frogs stopped all at once, you can take it for a measurement. The dog was a 6-year-old hound named Birch, a deer-colored bitch with a white blaze, and one ear that had never stood right since a boar cut her open as a pup. She did not spook. She had treed bare. She had stood her ground against a bobcat on the woodpile and run it off, and the one time a black snake got into the chicken house she had killed it, without much fuss, and brought it to the door like a gift. Dale had never in 6 years seen her crawl under the porch. Now there she was, pressed back against the stone footing where the spiders were, her eyes throwing back the porch light in 2 flat coins, and she would not come when he called her name low. He went back inside and did not wake Tammy. There was no reason to. Footin'. He stood at the kitchen window over the sink and looked out at the dark yard and the black wall of the woods past the garden fence, and he saw nothing, and he heard nothing but the creek, and he stood there longer than the nothing warranted, the cold of the linoleum coming up through his socks, waiting for a sound he could not have named if asked. After a while the frogs came back the way they had gone, all at once the whole low chorus of them resuming as if a hand had turned the dial the other way, and he let his shoulders down and told himself a fox had passed through, and that was the end of it. He almost believed it. Pattern kept a man alive in his line of work, and the pattern said, "Fox." A fox crosses a yard, and the frogs go quiet, and the dog wants no part of it. And in the morning there is nothing. Because there was nothing, only a fox going about a fox's night. He had seen it 100 times. He held to it the way a man holds a rail in the dark. Birch stayed under the porch until first light, though, and when she came out, she ate nothing, and she sat all that next day with her back to the house. He should have paid more attention to that. He knows it now. The next thing came. 4 nights later. And it came in the form of his goats. He kept 6 does and a wether in a lot below the garden. Behind woven wire he had stretched himself and grounded against the soil. So the bottom strand carried a charge. Good fence. He checked it the way he checked everything. Walking the line with a hand on the wire, feeling for the bite, and the bite was always there. The goats put themselves up in the little shed at dusk, and that was that. He had not lost an animal to anything in 11 years of keeping them. That morning the goats were in the far corner of the lot, all 7 of them, packed so tight into the angle of the fence that the 2 on the outside had their feet up on the wire. They had been there long enough to wear the mud smooth. They would not come for the grain bucket. The wether, a big stubborn animal that feared nothing and would knock a man down for the fun of it, stood at the front of the huddle with his head low and his eyes rolled white, and when Dale opened the gate, the whole knot of them tried to come through it at once and nearly took him off his feet. He got the goats settled and counted them twice and put grain down that they would not touch. And then he walked the lot the way he walked. A well field, slow in a grid, his eyes down. The rain, 2 nights back, had left the low ground soft, and a man who knew how to read ground could read it here. He found where the wether had stood and torn the sod with his hooves. He found the smooth places the does had worn pressing into the corner. He found, near the shed, a place where the straw had been scattered and one of the feed pans was crushed flat as if something heavy had come down on it. And he turned that pan over in his hands a while and set it down and kept walking, because the worst of a thing is usually at the edge of it and not the middle. He found it at the back fence, in the black ground, where the runoff kept the soil wet all summer and the goats never grazed because the grass came in sour. There a track. He crouched over it the way he crouched over a wellhead, slow, taking his time, not wanting to be wrong. It was pressed deep into the mud, and it had 4 toes and a heel, and the toes carried claw marks out front, and that part of it said, "Dog," said Big Dog said, the kind of stray that sometimes came down off the strip mines gone feral. He had shot 2 of those over the years and felt bad about neither. A big feral dog made sense. He wanted it to make sense. Then he laid his own hand down in the mud beside it, fingers spread, and the track was wider than his spread hand and longer by the breadth of 2 fingers, and the depth of it in ground that barely held his boot print told him the thing that made it had carried real weight. He went and got the tape from the truck. He measured it because measuring was what he did when he did not want to believe a thing. 6 1/4 inches across the pad. 8 1/2 from the back of the heel to the tip of the longest claw. He wrote the numbers on the back of a feed receipt with a carpenter pencil, and he stood there a long time with the receipt in his hand. No dog in the county left a track like that. He knew the dogs. He serviced wells at half the farms on this side of the mountain, and he knew their dogs by name. None of them stood tall enough to press a track that deep, and none of them, not one, had walked the back of his goat lot in the night and sent his wether into a corner with his eyes rolled white. He told Tammy at supper. He told it flat, the numbers first, the way he would tell a customer a pump was bad. She listened, the way she listened, with her hands quiet around her coffee. And she did not laugh at him, which was one of the reasons he had married her. She asked if it could be a bear. He said a bear left 5 toes and a different heel, and did not walk on the front of its foot like that. She asked what else it could be, and he said he did not know. And she watched his face when he said it, because in 22 years she had learned that Dale Witt saying he did not know was a rarer and worse thing than most men's certainty. That was a Tuesday. He set a trail camera on the back fence that evening, a cheap one he used to watch the well house when copper thieves were working the county, and he strung it to the corner post at the height of his own chest because whatever made the track was no low animal. The camera gave him 41 pictures over 2 nights, and 40 of them were nothing. Mist coming off the warm ground, a moth fat as a thumb, lit up white an inch from the lens. The slow swing of a hemlock branch the wind had worried at, frame after frame, the same branch in a dozen positions like a clock with no numbers. Scrolled through them at the kitchen table, with his reading glasses down his nose and his coffee going cold, and he was halfway to deciding the whole thing had been a feral dog passing through after all, the way a man talks himself down off a high place. The 41st picture was taken at 3:11 in the morning, and it was not nothing. He sat at the kitchen table with the little screen and looked at it for a long time before he understood what he was looking at, because the thing was too close to the lens to make sense of, the way a hand is hard to read, pressed flat against your eye. The flash had caught a curve of something that should not have been at that height. Hair, or the suggestion of it, lit white at the tips, and going to nothing behind, and below it a darkness that filled the rest of the frame, and gave back nothing, no wall, no fence, no shape he could name, just mass where there should have been the open dark of his goat lot, and at the top corner of the frame, just at the edge where the flash gave out, 2 points of light, set wider apart than any dog's eyes had a right to be, and high. Higher than the camera, higher than his chest. He had strung the camera to the post at the height of his own chest, because whatever made the track was no low animal, and the eyes in the picture were above it, which meant the thing had lowered its head to the lens. It had bent down to look into the camera. It had found the one machine he had set to watch it, and it had put its face against the glass. He did not show that one to Tammy. He told himself he wanted a clearer picture first. The truth was simpler, and he knew it. Even then he did not want to see her face change the way his own had changed. The hollow had been settled a long time, and old places carry old talk. And Dale had heard the talk the way everyone up the head of Muddy Fork had heard it. The Sizemores who had the place before the Wits had left in a hurry in a year nobody quite remembered. And there was a story that went with that, the kind of story men told at the volunteer fire hall, with a grin so you would know they did not mean it. Something on the ridge. Something old Press Codill swore he had seen crossing the high meadow on 2 legs in a winter of some year long gone, walking against the snow, too tall and wrong in the shoulders. And Press had been a drunk and a liar, and everyone said so, and the story had outlived him anyway. Dale had never given it 10 seconds of thought. He gave it no more now. A story was not a measurement. A track was a measurement. The silence kept coming back, though every few nights the frogs cut off mid-chorus, and Birch would not sleep on the porch anymore. She slept against the back door, now inside, pressed to the wood, and some nights Dale woke to find her standing in the dark hallway, facing the rear of the house, with the hair lifted along her spine, and a sound coming out of her that he had never heard a dog make, not a growl lower than that. A thing felt more than heard. And when he put his hand on her, she did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the wall. The 3rd week it came up to the house. He found the scratches in the morning, on the siding under the bathroom window, on the back side of the house that faced the ridge. 4 parallel grooves, cut into the old wood paint and into the wood beneath it, and they ran from above the window down to below it, and the top of them was higher than Dale could reach with his arm stretched up full. He was 6 foot even. He stood on a 5-gallon bucket to put his fingers in the top groove, and even then he had to reach. The grooves were spaced like the spread of a hand, 4 of them even, deliberate, and the wood inside each one was pale and fresh and beaded with sap. He stood on the bucket with his fingers in the marks and did not move for a while. The bathroom window looked into the hall. The hall ran past the back bedroom. The back bedroom was where his grandson slept. That changed the arithmetic of the whole thing. And it changed it in a way Dale felt in his chest before his mind had caught up to it. The boy was Cody, 4 years old, his daughter's son. And he had been with them since spring while his daughter worked the night shift at the regional hospital. An hour over the mountain, and could not keep a 4-year-old on those hours alone. Cody slept in the back bedroom under a quilt with tractors on it and a plastic flashlight he insisted on holding. And he woke, sometimes calling out. And lately, he had been waking more. Dale had thought it was the new place, the strange sounds of an old house. Cody had told his grandmother that the tall dog looked in his window. Tammy had told Dale, and Dale had said it was a dream, and he had believed it when he said it. He did not believe it now. Standing on the bucket with sap on his fingers, he called the county that afternoon. He was not a man who called for help, and he sat with the phone in his hand a while before he dialed, turning the feed receipt with the numbers on it over and over on the kitchen table. He called anyway because the thing had put its hand on the wall outside the room where the boy slept, and a careful man uses every tool he has, even the ones he does not trust. He got a dispatcher who took the report in the bored flat voice of someone filling a box on a screen. "Animal complaint," she said, like she was reading it off a list, and asked him for the nature of the animal. He said he did not know the nature of it, which was the truth, and that it was not a normal animal, and he gave her the measurements, the 6 1/4, the 8 1/2, the height of the scratches above his own reach. He heard the small pause on the line. He knew that pause. It was the pause of a person deciding what kind of man they had on the phone, the drunk kind or the lonely kind or the kind that wastes a county's time. And once a person had decided that about you, they did not hear another word you said. She told him an officer would follow up when one was available. He asked when that would be. She said, when one was available, the same words flatter. And he gave her his number and his name and the road and hung up knowing he had handed his trouble to a machine that would file it and forget it, and the machine did exactly that. He called the game department the next morning and got a recording and left a message with the numbers in it, the 6 1/4, the 8 1/2. The 10 feet to the top of the scratches said plainly. No story around them. He was a tax-paying man with a clean record and a real problem, and he had reached the edge of what the world would do for him. And the edge was close, and past it there was only the hollow and the ridge and whatever walked it. So he did what men in his line do when the manufactured part fails. He went to work with what he had. He moved Cody to the front bedroom, the one over the kitchen, away from the ridge side of the house, and he told the boy it was so he could be closer to the smell of breakfast. And the boy believed that and was pleased by it. He put new bulbs in the yard lights, the bright cold ones, and added 2 more on the back corners. Running the wire himself along the eave, and down to a switch he mounted on the wall by his side of the bed so he could throw the whole back of the house into light without rising. He tested it 3 times. He brought the deer rifle in from the gun safe, in the shop, a thing he had not done in 19 years of living there, and stood it loaded in the corner of the bedroom. And he hated the look of it. There. The wrongness of a loaded rifle standing in the room where his wife slept, and a child played on the floor by day. He stood it there anyway. He was not planning to shoot anything. A man who plans to shoot has already lost the thread of the thing. He was planning to be ready not to need to, which is a different thing. And the difference between those two is the whole of a careful man's life. And he knew it, and it gave him no comfort at all. He stopped sleeping much. He would lie in the dark and listen to the frogs and wait for them to stop. And on the nights they stopped, he would get up without a word and go through the dark house barefoot. checking the locks he had already checked, standing at the back windows looking out at the lit yard. And the yard would be empty, always empty. The grass silver under the new lights, and the woods past the fence a black wall giving nothing back. Empty. And the emptiness was worse than a shape would have been, because a shape he could have measured. One night, near the end of the month, he stood at the kitchen window at 20 after 2 and watched the line of the woods, and the line of the woods watched him back. He never saw it move. That was the part he could not get past, telling it later, the part that sat under his ribs in the months after. He was looking right at the place, right at the gap between two trees at the edge of the garden, and there was nothing there. The same black nothing that had been there every night. He had stood at that window, and then there was a pair of eyes there, amber gold and steady, throwing back the yard light from the dark, and they had not come from the left or the right or up out of the brush. They were simply there, the way a word you have been hunting for is suddenly in your mouth, present and complete and impossible to say when it had begun. He fixed the height against the garden gate, which he had built and hung himself, and knew to the inch to be 48 inches at the top rail, and the eyes were above the rail. Well above it. He stood very still and made the measurement the way he would make any measurement, refusing to let his fear round the number up, and the number would not round down. The eyes belonged to something standing on the ground, beyond the fence, whose head was better than 5 feet up, and they did not blink, and they did not waver. And they were not the eyes of a thing that had been startled into the edge of the light. They had come to the edge of the light on purpose, and stopped where they meant to stop, exactly where the dark gave way, and they were looking at the house. Not startled. Measuring. Dale did not move. His hand was on the switch that would light the back of the house, and he did not throw it, because some animal part of him below understood that the light was a fence and the dark beyond it was full, and that if he lit it, he might see all of what was standing there, and he was not ready for that. He stood with his hand on the switch, and his heart going hard and slow, and he made himself breathe, and he counted the way he counted seconds on a pressure test, and at the count of 40, gone the way the frogs went? There and then not. He threw the switch then, and the yard jumped white and empty, and he went out in his sock feet with the rifle and the big flashlight. And he should not have, but he did, because he had to see. And at the garden fence and the soft ground beyond the gate he found 2 tracks, and then a third, and the stride between them, heel to heel. He stepped off, and then measured, and it was longer than his own running stride, and he was 6 foot even, and not a short-legged man. He stood in the wet grass in the middle of the night, with the rifle in one hand and the light in the other, and he understood finally and fully what he had been refusing to understand since the frogs first stopped. There was something that came down off the ridge at night and stood at the edge of his light and watched the house where his grandson slept, and it was not a dog, and it was not a bear, and it was not anything that the county or the state or the talk at the fire hall had a true name for. The way a careful thing closes on a problem. It had a pattern. He could read the pattern, because reading patterns was his whole life. And the pattern was coming to the house. He did not sleep at all after that. He sat in the kitchen with the rifle across his knees and the lights off, because in the dark his eyes could find the eyes, and in the light they could not. Tammy found him there at dawn, and did not ask. She set coffee in front of him, and stood with her hand on his shoulder, and looked out the window at the ridge with him. And the two of them watched the dark go gray, and the gray go gold over the trees, and the light came down into the hollow, and proved nothing at all. The yard was empty. The fence was whole. The frogs sang, and none of it meant the thing was gone. It only meant the night was over, The next days he spent making the house a thing that could be held. He cut back the brush along the ridgeside, so there was 40 feet of open ground between the woods and the wall. He moved the woodpile that had stood against the back of the house for 20 years, because it was a stair, and he had not seen it as a stair until now. He ran a second strand of hot wire around the goat lot, and a single strand low across the gap in the garden fence where the tracks came through, not because he thought a wire would stop it, but because a wire would carry the news up to the bell he rigged on the back porch. And a man who knows is a man who has a chance. He brought Birch in every night now, and she came gladly, and she lay against the inner wall of the front bedroom where Cody slept, between the boy's bed and the ridge, and Dale understood that the dog had appointed herself to a post, and he did not argue with her about it. Cody asked him one evening, in the plain way of small children, whether the tall dog was going to come in the house. Dale was tightening a hinge on the back door at the time, down on one knee with the screwdriver, and he stopped with the screw half-turned. He looked at his grandson's small hand on the door frame, the fingers spread, smaller than the spread of a single one of those grooves in the siding, and something went through him that he had no word for and did not try to find one. He said no. He said the tall dog was not going to come in the house because Pa had fixed it so it could not, and that was a promise, and Cody took the promise the way children take a thing from a man they trust, completely, and went to find his grandmother, and Dale knelt there with the screwdriver and finished the screw because his hand needed something to do. It came back on a Thursday night with rain in it. The rain had been falling since dark, a steady mountain rain that filled the creek until he could hear it from the house, a low roar where there was usually a murmur, and it put a hiss over everything and washed out the small sounds a man listens for. Dale hated it. The rain took his ears from him, and his ears were half of what he had. He had spent his life listening to things he could not see. The knock of a bad bearing 40 feet down, the change in a pump's note that meant sand, and now the one night the thing was most likely to come was the one night he had been made deaf. He sat in the kitchen, in the dark, with the rifle across his knees and a towel over his shoulders against the chill, and he could not hear the frogs through the rain to know if they had stopped, and that blindness sat on him heavy as a wet coat. He got up twice an hour and went to each back window in turn and looked out at the lit grass and the silver lines of the rain and the black wall of the cut-back woods 40 feet off, and each time the yard was empty, and each time he sat back down and the not knowing was worse than before. Near 1 in the morning the bell on the back porch rang once. A short, hard jangle through the hiss of the rain, and then the low wire across the garden gap was down. He was up and at the back window with the light off before the bell had finished. The yard light caught the rain in long silver lines, and under it the grass lay flat and shining and empty. He stood and watched the line he had cut, the 40 feet of open ground, and he waited for a shape to cross it, and nothing crossed it, and that was when he understood that the thing was already across. The wire had been tripped from the house side. It was between him and the woods now. It was in the open ground he had made, close to the wall, somewhere the angle of the window would not give him, and he could not see it, and the rain had taken his ears. Then Birch began to scream in the front bedroom. He had never heard a dog make that sound, and he hopes he never does again, a high, broken sound, torn out of a brave animal, that had decided to stand anyway, and he went down the dark hall toward it with the rifle up and his heart slamming and Tammy's voice behind him. And he came through the bedroom door into the dark, and Cody was sitting up in the bed with the plastic flashlight clutched in both hands, and its small beam pointed at the window, and in the window, filling it, low and close, on the other side of the glass, was the thing from the ridge. He saw it for less than 2 seconds, and he saw all of it. And he has never been able to stop seeing it. The flashlight in the boy's hands lit it from below the way light should never come up onto a face, and the rain ran down the glass between them, and broke the shape into moving pieces, and even broken it was too much. It was down on its haunches to bring its head level with the low window, and even folded down like that it filled the frame. The fur was black and slicked flat with the rain, and laid over a shoulder that was built wrong, too high, too forward, more bear than dog in the mass of it, but nothing of a bear in the shape. The muzzle was long, and the lips were back-off teeth that the flashlight caught wet, and the eyes lit gold from beneath were fixed not on Dale and not on the dog, but on the boy, level and steady and patient,